I thought I knew my granddaughter. I thought I understood her silence. After 2 years of not hearing her voice, I had learned to read her. The way she tilted her head when she was curious. The way she pulled at the hem of her sweater when she was anxious. The small nod she gave when she meant yes. And the single blink she gave when she meant yes. And the single blink she gave when she meant no. I thought we had a language, her and me. I thought I knew everything I needed to know. I was wrong. I didn't know the half of it. Her name is Lily. She's 9 years old, and she has her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness, which I say with nothing but love. She stopped talking 2 years ago after the accident, a car wreck on Route 9 in November that took her grandmother, my wife Carol, and left Lily sitting in the back seat in silence that the doctors said was trauma. Selective mutism, they called it. Not a physical problem. A psychological one. Her throat worked fine. Her voice was in there somewhere. She had just decided somewhere deep in her mind that the world wasn't safe enough to speak into anymore. I understood that more than anyone probably realized. I live alone now, in the house Carol and I bought in 1987 in Glenwood, Ohio. A 2-story colonial with a big maple in the front yard that drops leaves every October like it's personally apologizing for the cold coming. The house is too big for one person. I know that. My son knows that too. And he has used that knowledge against me in ways I am only now beginning to understand. My son's name is Patrick. He's 41 years old, and he works in commercial real estate in Columbus, about an hour and a half south of here. He married his wife Sandra 9 years ago. I was happy at the wedding. I danced with Carol, and I shook Patrick's hand, and I thought, this is good. This is right. This is how it's supposed to go. Sandra is the kind of woman who makes you feel vaguely uncomfortable without ever doing anything you can specifically point to. She's polite in a way that feels like a door being held open just barely wide enough for you to squeeze through. She remembers birthdays but forgets the things that matter. She sent flowers to Carol's funeral and did not cry. I noticed. I didn't say anything. After Carol died, I noticed a lot of things I didn't say anything about. Patrick called me on a Thursday evening in early March. I was in the kitchen making soup. Just canned tomato, nothing special, but Carol always said I could make even canned soup taste like something. And his number came up on the phone, and I answered it expecting the usual. A 10-minute call. How are you doing, Dad? Fine, son. Take care of yourself. You too. Instead, he said, Dad, I need to ask you a big favor. He told me that Sandra's company had scheduled a conference in Seattle for 2 weeks. He told me that his own work schedule was impossible right now, a big deal closing. He couldn't be home enough to take care of Lily properly. He told me that Lily's therapist actually thought a change of environment might be good for her, might even help. And then he paused, and I heard him take a breath, and he said, Would you be willing to take her for a little while? Just 2 weeks, maybe 3. They would mean a lot. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I hadn't spent real time alone with Lily since before the accident. We'd seen each other at Christmas, at Easter, brief visits where Sandra hovered nearby and Lily sat quietly, and I made awkward conversation about cartoons I didn't watch and shows I didn't understand, but alone, just the two of us in the house in Glenwood with the maple tree and Carol's garden that I'd been trying to keep alive. No, we hadn't had that. I drove down to Columbus on a Saturday to pick her up. Lily was standing on the front porch with a purple backpack and a rolling suitcase that had a cartoon fox on the front. She looked at me with those steady, serious eyes, and I felt something loosen in my chest. She walked to my car and put her suitcase in the trunk by herself, carefully, and then climbed into the back seat and buckled her own seatbelt. Patrick stood in the doorway. He looked tired. He hugged me quickly, patted my shoulder, said, Thanks, Dad. Really. Sandra waved from somewhere behind him. I waved back. I drove home. Lily watched the highway through the window. About 40 minutes in, she reached into her backpack and took out a small spiral notebook and a green marker. She wrote something and held it up so I could see it in the rearview mirror. Can we stop for fries? I laughed out loud. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. We absolutely can, I said. The first few days were quiet in the way that felt right rather than heavy. Lily had her routines. She woke early. She made her own bed with a precision that frankly put mine to shame. She ate her cereal standing at the kitchen counter while looking out the window at the backyard. She liked to draw. She spent hours at the kitchen table with her colored pencils, filling pages with elaborate scenes I didn't always understand but always admired. She drew horses. She drew houses. She drew Carol's garden with every flower labeled, though I never told her what the flowers were called, which meant she had somehow already known. I talked to her the way I'd learned to. I gave her room to respond with the notebook or with gestures. I didn't push. I didn't try to be the grandfather who fixed things. I just tried to be present. We watched old westerns in the evenings. I made dinner every night. Real dinners, not canned soup. Pork chops, chicken and rice. A pot roast on her fourth night that she gave 2 thumbs up after the first bite, which might have been the best review I've ever received in my life. I started sleeping better than I had in 2 years. I take medication every night before bed. Blood pressure, cholesterol. The standard collection for a man of 68 who spent 40 years coaching high school football and eating too many of Carol's pies without thinking about consequences. My pill organizer lives on the kitchen counter, one of those weekly plastic boxes with the days of the week on each compartment. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I filled it every Sunday the same way I always had. I didn't think much about it. Lily did. I noticed her watching me one evening as I took my pills. Just watching, the way she watched everything, quietly, completely, with that unsettling thoroughness. I smiled at her and she looked away, back down at her drawing. I didn't think anything of it. That was day 5. On day 6, I got a phone call from my doctor's office reminding me that my blood pressure had been elevated at my last checkup and asking whether I'd been keeping up with my medication. I said yes, of course. She said the numbers from my home monitoring device. I had one of those wrist cuffs my doctor made me start using. Were showing some unusual readings. Higher than expected. Are you under any extra stress? She asked. I almost laughed. Some, I said. She told me to monitor it closely and call back if anything changed. I hung up and went back to the kitchen and took a glass of water and looked out at the yard and didn't think anything of it. On day 8, I found Lily standing at the kitchen counter. She was standing very still, looking at my pill organizer. Her back was to me, so I couldn't see her face. When she heard me come in, she turned around fast, and something in her expression was different. Not guilty. More like frightened, like she'd seen something that scared her and didn't know what to do about it. I asked, "You okay?" She nodded. Slowly. Then she went back to the living room. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, uneasy without knowing why, and then I made us both a cup of cocoa and sat down next to her on the sofa, and we watched the rest of a documentary about Yellowstone that she pointed out in the guide earlier. She didn't draw that evening. She just sat beside me, and once when I shifted on the sofa, she leaned over slightly so her shoulder touched my arm. She didn't move away. I didn't move away either. On day 9, Patrick called. He sounded distracted. He asked how things were going, how Lily was doing, whether she was causing any trouble. I told him she was no trouble at all. He said, "Good, good." And then there was a pause, and he said, "Dad, I actually wanted to talk to you about something." I waited. "Sandra and I have been talking," he said, "about the house." The house. I knew immediately what kind of conversation this was. "We think it might be time to consider some options," he said. "It's a big property for one person. The market in Glenwood is actually really solid right now. You could sell, take the equity, move somewhere smaller, somewhere with a community. There are some really nice 55-plus places near Columbus. We could look at some." I said, "I'm not interested in moving." He said, "Dad, I'm not interested in moving." He said, "Dad, I'm not interested," I said again. "This is where your mother lived. This is where she planted that garden. I'm not selling it." He went quiet. Then he said, carefully, "I'm just thinking about your well-being." "I know what you're thinking about," I said. We ended the call politely. We're good at that, my son and I, ending things politely. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after. The house was quiet. I could hear Lily upstairs, the soft creak of the floor above the kitchen. I thought about Carol. I thought about the equity in this house, which was not small. We'd paid her off 15 years ago, and the neighborhood had done nothing but appreciate since then. I thought about my life insurance policy, which I'd updated 2 years ago when Carol died, and which named Patrick as the sole beneficiary. Then I stopped thinking about it because it made me feel sick. On the morning of day 11, I woke up dizzy. Not just regular morning dizzy, room spinning, have to grip the doorframe dizzy. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for it to pass. It did, mostly after a few minutes. I took my blood pressure and it was high. Higher than the previous readings. I made a note to call the doctor. I went downstairs. Lily was already in the kitchen, already at the counter, and she turned around when she heard me on the stairs. She was holding the Tuesday compartment of my pill organizer in both hands, and she was looking at me with an expression I will never in my life forget. It was not a child's expression. It was the expression of someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a long time and had finally decided they could not carry it alone anymore. She set the pill compartment down on the counter. Then she picked up her notebook. She wrote for a long moment, more than usual, pressing hard with a marker. And then she held it up. "Grandpa, the pills are different. Dad came here on Sunday when you were napping. I saw him switch them. I didn't know what to do. I'm sorry I waited." I stared at those words for a very long time. My hands were shaking. I'm not ashamed to say that. I'm 68 years old and I've coached football for 4 decades and I've buried my wife and I've managed to hold myself together through most of it. But standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning reading those 12 sentences in green marker, my hand shook like I was cold. "You saw him," I said. Not a question. My voice came out strange, quiet in a way I didn't intend. She nodded. Her eyes were fixed on mine, and they were steady and serious, and also terrified. "Sunday," I said, "when I was napping after church." She nodded again. I put the pill compartment down. I picked up my phone, and I called my doctor's office, and I told the nurse who answered that I needed someone to call me back today. Not tomorrow, today, because I had reason to believe my medication had been tampered with. My voice was very calm. I surprised myself. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, and I looked at my granddaughter, who was sitting across from me with her notebook in her lap, and her hands folded on top of it, waiting. "Lily," I said, "I need you to know something. I believe you. Every word. Do you understand me? I believe you completely." Something moved across her face. Relief, yes, but more than that. Something that had been braced for a long time quietly let go. My doctor called back within the hour. I told her what Lily had seen. She told me to bring the pills in immediately and not to take anything from that organizer in the meantime. I drove us both to the clinic, Lily in the passenger seat this time, her notebook on her knee. They tested the pills. I don't know exactly what I expected. Part of me, the part that still wanted to believe my son was fundamentally decent, that Sandra was just cold and not something worse, was hoping they'd come back normal, that there'd be an explanation, a mix-up at the pharmacy. Anything. They came back that afternoon. 2 of the pills in my Wednesday and Thursday compartments were not my blood pressure medication. The pharmacist the clinic consulted identified them as a diuretic, not the kind prescribed for blood pressure management, but the kind that, taken in conjunction with my existing medication over time, would cause dangerous potassium depletion, which could cause cardiac events, which could look, to a coroner, very much like natural causes in a 68-year-old man with a documented history of elevated blood pressure. The doctor said those words carefully and looked at me carefully and asked if I understood what she was telling me. I understood. I called the non-emergency police line that same evening. A detective named Williams came to the house and took the pill organizer and sat at my kitchen table and took my statement for an hour and a half. Lily sat in the living room. She could hear us, I knew. I didn't try to hide it from her. She had earned the right to hear it. At one point, Detective Williams asked me if I had any idea why Patrick had access to the house. I told him Patrick still had a key. I'd given it to him years ago. I'd never asked for it back because I never thought I'd need to. Williams wrote that down. He asked me if Lily would be willing to provide a statement. I said that was her choice and went to the living room and sat beside her and explained, as plainly as I could, what was happening and what was being asked. She listened with those serious eyes. Then she picked up her notebook and wrote, "I will tell them what I saw. I want to." I showed it to Williams. He looked at it for a moment, then at Lily, and he said quietly, "She's a brave kid." "Yes," I said, "she is." Patrick was arrested at his office in Columbus on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after Lily gave her statement. Sandra was arrested at home the same morning. The charges included criminal tampering, attempted poisoning, and conspiracy. There were financial records, too. As it turned out, Patrick had taken out a small loan against an inheritance he hadn't received yet, apparently confident enough in the outcome to have already spent against it. That detail came out in the weeks after the arrest. I wish I could say it surprised me more than it did. I won't tell you what those weeks were like in full. Some things don't need a full accounting. There were phone calls. There was a lawyer. There was a very bad night in February when I sat in Carol's chair in the living room and looked at her garden through the window, dead and gray under the snow, and I thought about all the things I hadn't known and all the things I hadn't let myself believe, and I let myself feel it completely, just that once, and then I got up and made myself a cup of coffee and went to bed. The next morning, Lily was at the kitchen counter when I came downstairs. She looked at me. I looked at her. She pointed to the cabinet where the oatmeal was and raised her eyebrows. "Please," I said, "extra brown sugar." She rolled her eyes in a way that was so thoroughly and purely Carol that it knocked the breath out of me for a moment. Then she got out the pot. The family court hearing for Lily's custody was 3 months later. Patrick and Sandra were still in pretrial detention. My lawyer had filed for emergency guardianship in the interim, and the court had granted it based on the circumstances. I wasn't sure how the permanent hearing would go. I won't pretend I wasn't afraid. I sat in the courtroom in my good navy blazer, and I answered the judge's questions, and I told her what Lily and I had built together in those months. The dinners, the westerns, the colored pencils covering every surface in the kitchen, the morning routine, the way Lily had started leaving notes on the bathroom mirror for me, little drawings of suns and birds that I found when I woke up. I told the judge that Lily had never once, in all our time together, seemed afraid in my house. Only safe. Lily was in the courtroom. The judge asked her through the guardian ad litem whether she wanted to stay with her grandfather. Lily looked at the guardian ad litem for a moment. Then she looked at me. Then she turned back to the judge, and in a voice I had never heard before, small and careful and real, the voice of a 9-year-old who had decided the world was safe enough to speak into again, she said, "Yes." Just that. One word. The courtroom was very quiet. I kept my face still because I did not want to cry in front of a judge. I mostly succeeded. She's been with me for 8 months now. Full guardianship, permanent. We have a routine that has become the kind of thing I look forward to, the way I used to look forward to Friday nights in football season. Not because anything dramatic happens, but because it's mine, and it's real, and it's good. She talks now. Not constantly. She still goes quiet sometimes, and I let her, because silence isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's just how a person thinks. But she talks. She told me last week that she thinks Carol's garden needs a new section in the corner by the fence, and that she'd like to plant sunflowers there in the spring. She said it at dinner, just plainly, between bites, like it was obvious. I said that sounded exactly right. She watched. She waited. She kept her voice inside until the moment it was needed most, and then she used it to save my life. I owe her more than I can ever say, so instead, I try to be here, reliably, daily, completely, and I tend the garden, and I cook the dinners, and I find her drawings on the bathroom mirror every morning. That's what I have left to give. I give it every day. And some mornings, before she's awake, I stand in the kitchen with my coffee, and I look out at Carol's garden, and I think, I made it. I'm still here. And so is she. That's enough. That's more than enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not just the fear of it, though the fear was real, and it still surfaces sometimes on quiet nights when I'm reaching for a glass of water and my hand moves past the pill organizer on the counter. More than the fear, I've been sitting with the cause of it. Not who caused it, though I know who did. I mean the deeper thing. The chain of choices that started long before Lily ever pressed her hand over mine. Patrick didn't become what he became overnight. I know that. I raised him, and there were things I let slide because it was easier than confronting them. Moments when I saw something sharp and self-serving in how he operated, and I told myself it was ambition, it was drive, it was fine. I was wrong. The things we don't name, we allow, and what we allow in small doses we eventually have to face in full. That's the part no one warns you about. Not the betrayal itself. The reckoning with your own role and not seeing it clearly enough, early enough. But then there's Lily. She was 9 years old. She had not spoken a word in 2 years. She was carrying a secret that would have frightened a grown adult into paralysis, and she carried it for 3 days while she figured out what to do. 3 days of watching me, of sitting beside me at dinner, of drawing her pictures and sleeping under my roof while she held that weight alone. And then she picked up a green marker and she wrote what she knew, clearly and without hesitation, because she had decided that the truth mattered more than her silence. That's not something you teach a child in a week. That kind of courage, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself, comes from character that was built long before I ever knew what was at stake. Lily watched everything. She learned what was right and what was wrong not from being told in a classroom, but from paying attention to the world around her, from trusting her own understanding of it. That's intelligence in the truest sense. Not test scores. Observation. Judgment. The willingness to act on what you know even when acting is frightening. And the willingness to speak when speaking costs you something. That's not a small thing. For Lily, it cost her the silence she had built around herself for 2 years like a wall. She had reasons for that wall. Real ones. And she chose to come out from behind it anyway because someone she loved needed her to. I think about that a lot. I think about what it means to choose the harder right thing over the easier silence. It applies to 9-year-olds. It applies to 68-year-old men who didn't ask hard enough questions about their own sons. It applies to all of us, every day, in ways that are usually smaller than tampered pills, but no less real. What you do with what you know. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing, really. Lily is 10 now. She talks every day. She has opinions about breakfast and strong feelings about which westerns are worth watching, and she is currently lobbying hard for a dog, a campaign she is conducting with a persistence that I find both exhausting and completely wonderful. She is whole in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever see. I did not earn that by being a perfect grandfather or a perfect father. I earned it by being present, by believing her the moment she needed to be believed, and by deciding, after everything, that the life in front of me was worth tending. That's what I know now. You tend what's left. You show up. You don't waste the time you almost didn't get.